News, play breakdowns, power rankings, storylines you never hear talked about anywhere else. It's all straight shots here, fired by straight shooters. S and Gun. This is the Objective Basketball Podcast.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Objective Basketball Podcast, joined by Lauren Gunn. Lauren, how you doing? So far, so good to start.
So far, so good.
Yeah,
it was a crazy weekend, but I got to see Chicago. Chicago was fun. We had a good time.
Nice.
And we got a Mavs game tonight, Mavs versus Memphis. So I'm excited about that. Things are good. Things are good.
Yeah.
How are you?
Yeah. I mean, look, we're pretty close to Scoot Henderson versus the Raptors. There was an almost trade that happened that maybe could have had Scoot be on the Raptors, but that is neither here nor there, ladies and gentlemen. The past is the past. We don't dwell on it anymore, right, Lauren? Regardless, we have a great conversation with Bryan Toporek coming up in this podcast, talking about Philadelphia, talking about the Sixers, talking about the new look Sixers without James Harden. Maybe James Harden comes back. Maybe he doesn't. Maybe he's on the bench. Maybe he isn't. Who knows? But it's a very good conversation that we have coming up. This is part of the podcast, difference that we're trying to have this year, where every week we're going to have one guest come on from a specific team and sort of talk about what's happening with that team. It just so happened that this week was the Philadelphia 76ers, and we got lucky because obviously there's a ton of stuff going on with the Sixers right now between James Harden and the new look stuff. Speaking of the Sixers, Nikola Jokic, player of the week in the Western Conference. Tyrese Maxey, player of the week in the Eastern Conference. He has been absolutely sensational. He cooked the Toronto Raptors on Saturday when they played, and they just had no response. He seems like he is the leader for the Most Improved award after a week, and I know it's overreactions and things like that, but seemingly the extra usage and no Harden has really empowered him to be himself on offense, and he's just looked absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I think with Tyrese Maxey, a lot of people were sort of expecting the usage and this improvement and sort of like, oh, okay, wow factor coming from him early on in the season. But like you were talking about with the Most Improved player, a lot of these narratives start in the first, however many games of the season at the beginning. And so for someone like Tyrese Maxey in Philadelphia, who's trying to figure out what their potential narrative and tone for the season will be, to have a bright spot like that amidst all of this other chaos is a huge deal for them and a huge win. And so obviously it's very early and it's easy to call it, a crazy reaction or whatever anyone wants to call it. But this is a huge sign for Philadelphia. So it's been awesome to see. He's a Dallas kid, so I got to give him the nod there, give him the shout out there. But I'm excited to see what this means for Philadelphia and see what his season looks like and kind of how he continues to build on this throughout the year.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, no, and I think ultimately he's kind of geared up towards having an all-star season. I think that's sort of clear just because of the usage being added on. And I don't know, it just seems like the road has been paved for him to have a really, really big season. And it's sort of become obvious at this point. Sometimes, they do feel like overreactions, but sometimes it just like you can see it in plain sight what's happening in front of you. And Tyrese Maxey is definitely, taking that quote unquote leap. The new look Sixers, they look very, very good. Again, we'll talk about them in a little bit with Bryan, but the new look of the in-season tournament. So the NBA also unveiled a court design for the NBA in-season tournament. All 30 teams will be rocking these new, very colorful, very vibrant courts. Some of them look worse than others. Some of them don't look too bad, to be honest with you. They sort of match up with the pretty awful City Edition jerseys that we've seen kind of being spread around and being rumored. Ultimately, this is part of an effort to make the thing look different, right? The NBA is trying to have this soccer style mid-season or in-season tournament that includes, a group stage and then knockout rounds. And then obviously the semifinals and finals that are set to be played in Las Vegas, I believe at the start of December 7th to 9th. Okay. Outside, I guess the first thing I would ask you, Lauren, is how do you feel about the new look stuff? Do you like the fact that they're trying to change up the actual look of the court and the style of the tournament, et cetera, or would you like it to be more, I don't know, I guess traditional?
Um, that's a tough. I mean, it's a tough question. I think there's good and bad. I mean, as far as the new look, I appreciate the commitment of, okay, we've got these jerseys, and we're gonna try and switch up the court. We've got the promo commercial. I appreciate the commitment to, if you're gonna try to implement something new, go for it. I don't love some of the jerseys that I've seen. I don't love a lot of the courts that I've seen. I think that there's room for improvement there, and maybe that's something that we see down the line. But as far as the NBA in-season tournament being a thing, I do admire and appreciate the level of commitment of, oh, these are different games. This is a big deal. This isn't something that's like, oh, this is chump change. Like, a lot of people see these NBA contracts, and so this is just chump change, and they're really just worthless. I appreciate them trying to show that it is bigger, and for some of these guys, it could be a very big deal for many of these guys. And so I when I think about it that way, I like it. But this is the first year, obviously, so I kind of want to wait and see what it looks like. I think it's going to be an interesting thing to watch as an observer, for sure.
Yeah, I think ultimately the first year of anything feels kind of shaky. I remember the first, we both remember, it's not like it was a long time ago, but the first iteration of the play-in tournament, right? In the bubble, which was very intense. I think it added a new element because it was the bubble, but also it gave the opportunity for the NBA to be inventive and to try something new. They tweaked it as it went along, and they adjusted it so that it wasn't just one play-in game, and it was actually two play-in games that they incorporated for the regular season. I absolutely think the play-in is a smashing success. It has been incredible. I love the fact that there is this sort of single elimination style incorporated into basketball. And now you're seeing this being incorporated with the in-season tournament. Yes, there's going to be a group stage. And yes, there's going to be, the knockout stage later on that still is included in the regular season. But ultimately, there's been this question of like, oh my God, are the players going to care about this? Are they going to care about this being competitive? And I just think that is absolutely ridiculous, right? These guys get paid money to play in regular season games. This is included in the regular season games that come. They get a bonus for playing in these games and winning these games. But on top of that, this is part of the contract. You literally sign the contract to play in regular season games, to play in playoff games. And yes, we can debate the whole, are players invested in regular season games in the first place, et cetera, et cetera. I think this kind of feeds into the competitive nature of professional athletes. Lauren, we talked about this last year, right? Where we said it's sort of crazy to think these guys aren't competitive by nature. Do you know how hard it is to get into the NBA? Do you know how hard it is to stay in the NBA, to become an all-star and an MVP? You need to be, as JJ Redick calls it, a quote-unquote sicko to be in this league, right? And I think like to question that and say, oh man, nobody's going to care about this tournament. Nobody's going to care about this because this is just, there's no incentive. Players are only getting paid this much, whatever. Bonus is only this much. A money incentive doesn't matter. That's ridiculous to me because these guys will go out and do that consistently. This isn't some all-star game. This actually impacts their regular season as well. And on top of that, they might be able to get a trip to Vegas out of it, which is another bonus to all of this. All of the players love going to Vegas. All of the players love going to that. And I think it gives you a chance to compete for something else. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't have to all be about the Larry O'Brien trophy. It would be awesome to see a team like Detroit, who is off to a good start, or Oklahoma City Thunder, who we love, both of us on this podcast, get to a point where they're, hey, maybe in the semifinals, maybe in the finals of this in-season tournament, and we get to see these young teams be on a good stage. I just think there's so many more positives than there are negatives to this in-season tournament. Being so against it feels silly to me.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I'm with you there. I think it's one of those things where it's almost like, and I'm glad you brought up the play-in tournament because people obviously had their questions and it was how serious is our players going to take it. There was a lot of sort of initial criticism. And then it's one of those things where once you kind of see it in motion, it's like, oh, wow. Yeah. This is where you really see what you're talking about with JJ Redick calling it like the basketball sicko mind, when you really see the sort of true competitive nature come out and how serious it really is. So I think that it's going to be a very similar situation here with the in-season tournament. And I hope that it is. I hope it is for the fans. I hope it is for everyone watching, for the players. It's just going to make it that much better. So I am excited for it.
And from like a fan perspective, there's going to be conversation about it. Let's say, I don't know, like your Mavericks win the in-season tournament. Luka just goes off, right? Single elimination, Luka Doncic. I feel like he could absolutely destroy in this tournament. Let's say the Mavericks go off and win this in-season tournament. But let's say in the playoffs, they lose in the first round or the second round. Oh, that in-season tournament thing was Mickey Mouse. They couldn't do it. They couldn't capitalize on it. And there goes the content machine, right? There goes the engagement machine. People will start replying in tweets, et cetera, et cetera. And yeah, it might be, you know, I don't know, bad publicity. I don't know if it's necessarily bad, but it still is attention. And it still is, I guess, rhetoric, if you want to call it, just like dialogue, narrative that is happening about this in-season tournament. And eventually, real stakes get added on because fandom is like that, right? The reason we hold finals MVP to such high regard is because it's like, it's weighed so heavily in NBA history, right? You look back at all of the finals MVPs, you look back at everybody who's won the award. People still talk about how ridiculous it was that Andre Iguodala won in 2015. And I just think like these things take time. These things require history to be built. And ultimately, the same thing is going to happen with the in-season tournament. We might look back at this, 15, 20 years from now and say, man, the creation of the in-season tournament was an incredible success. Genius. Look at how far it's come. The Apple in-season tournament, whatever they do with this thing, with TV rights and all that stuff. Yeah, I'm sure that's why they're doing this, though. It's just another thing they could sell, right? But I just think it's going to be a smashing success. Anybody who's questioning that, I don't know. I don't see any, I don't see any real downside to it. Anyways, that's sort of everything that's happened. Big topics that have happened throughout the week. Again, we're going to be doing this thing where we talk to one beat writer or reporter every single week on Mondays about a specific team. And then we'll go out and we'll pick another team next week. And you guys will see that as well. On Thursdays, we will mostly be sort of talking about the NBA as we also talk about our own teams. So, I cover the Toronto Raptors, Lauren covers the Dallas Mavericks and sort of the Texas triangle, if you will. So we'll talk about those teams as well. And right now, we will talk about the Philadelphia 76ers. So, ladies and gentlemen, my conversation with Bryan Toporek, all things Philly related. All right, folks, welcome back. We are joined by Bryan Toporek. He is a friend of the podcast, also a coverer, if you will, of the league at large, but mostly the Philadelphia 76ers. Maybe we can get into the Oklahoma City Thunder later at some point. But Bryan, first of all, how you doing? How's the vibes going with Philly so far this year?
The vibes are shockingly immaculate. I'm going to enjoy this pocket of time because it could get thrown off as soon as Thursday. So nice. These next 3 days, I'm going to soak up as much as I can.
So the Sixers have looked good, like really good, in my opinion. I watched the game against the Raptors. They had no answers. The Raptors are sort of this defensive-oriented team. They're trying to make things as hard as possible on you. And my main observation from that was it just did not matter. Whatever they threw at them, Maxey had responses for pretty much everything. Joel Embiid, obviously has responses for everything. And I think given their roster construction, they're a bit more balanced defensively. Like they can throw out more size. And with Melton in the starting lineup, there's just more there at the point of attack to work with on the defensive end. That's what struck out to me first. But I guess from your, three games that you've seen, last night's dominant win against Portland, the opening night game against Milwaukee, how do you feel about this team and how it's currently constructed?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to feel good. They've been preaching ball movement, player movement starting in training camp, which is something they really did not have a ton of with Doc Rivers and James Harden last year. It was just James Harden and Joel Embiid are going to commandeer the offense, and guys will get touches because James and Joel are going to draw double teams or draw extra coverage, and those guys are willing passers. They'll kick out. Right. But, those two guys were initiating a large majority of the offense. So far this year, it really has been a lot more egalitarian. Maxey is averaging more than 6 assists per game. D'Anthony Melton actually led the team with 8 assists against Portland and had 4 in each of the first 2 games. Embiid has had 6 assists in each of his first 3 games. He's only had 4 other streaks in his career where he's had 6 or more assists over a 3-game stretch. So just seeing really like anyone can rebound and take it up the floor, and they're not immediately looking to pass it to James Harden, who's going to dribble the air out of the ball for 18 seconds. Right. It's just been such a refreshing change of pace. And then again, like the player movement as well, guys, Embiid said it last night, guys are cutting with a purpose. He has, I guess he's been like preaching this since training camp. Like, I'm going to find you. Yeah. Just, you guys have to actually move. You can't just stand still on the perimeter. And to their credit, I think Tobias, Kelly Oubre has been really good in that regard. Maxey with the ball in his hands more without Harden has just looked like a megastar. He's not going to keep shooting 56% from 3 over the whole season. Bold prediction, I know, but if he continues at this rate, like his first All-Star, where there's always the conversation in January, who's going to be a first-time All-Star? Spoiler alert, Tyrese Maxey is very much on pace, 3 games into the year to be in that conversation.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to bet today who's winning the most improved, I would say Maxey is probably in the lead here. Just looking at the rest of the NBA, obviously there's other deserving candidates, but the way Maxey has popped off with the extra usage, with the more touches, it's been great to see. And I think ultimately empowering him more as a ball handler and playmaker has led to a leap in that category for him as well. He's seeing the floor much better. He's making excellent reads. And like you said, this egalitarian style is bringing out the best of him on ball and off ball. Because, yeah, he can be the guy. Like, man, against Toronto again, there was this moment where he just split a double team to him at half court and burst through the seam. It was incredible to see. He can do that on ball for you. And I talked about it on the timeline when I was rewatching the game, but he's so hard to guard because you want to give him space so that he doesn't just blow by you, because there are even Dennis Schroeder, who is one of the fastest guys in the league, struggled to keep up with him. But when you give him that space, like you said, he's shooting 56% from 3, and he's revolutionized his jump shot. I mean, if you compare rookie Tyrese Maxey to current day Tyrese Maxey, the depth at which he can shoot it, the distance at which he can shoot it, he's expanded his game to the point where like the geometry of the court has changed for him offensively. And when you have threats out there, it just makes so much more sense. Am I wrong to say that this team is actually deeper than it was last year? Because I like the Oubre addition. Obviously, signing him for a minimum is pretty good. His game is going to come with its warts, right? He's not like the most excellent defender, but he does have length, at least at the very least. He can provide some length on the wings. Patrick Beverley, like, he's not a guy that you're going to rely on to start, but off of the bench, 15, 16 minutes a night as your point guard, I could see that. Paul Reed, obviously, is a guy that they've invested in. PJ Tucker. I just think there's more depth on this team, more weapons, more lineups that you can throw out there, and you can be a little bit more unique with it. Do you feel the same way? Do you think that, like, you can trust the depth on this roster for an 82-game plus season?
I think so. I mean, I was saying this coming into the year, especially once they signed Oubre and Danny Green, like, if not for all of the Harden nonsense hovering over this team, you could make a very credible case that they are at least no worse than they were last year, which is, not what you envisioned July 1st when George Niang, Shake Milton, and Jalen McDaniels all walk out the door for nothing. And all of a sudden it's like, well, okay, we're going to re-sign Paul Reed, but those guys were actually key rotation members and we just lost them all. But yeah,
Niang, the most winningest player in the 2020s,
That's right. But yeah, to your point, I mean, Kelly Oubre has been phenomenal. Again, not going to keep shooting 50% overall. So regression is going to come for these guys. We are working in very small samples here. Jaden Springer hasn't gotten a ton of run. Picked up 3 very quick fouls last night, but also has had some very impressive defensive plays. So it's nice to see him getting a little bit of run and just letting the Sixers see what they have in him. To your point, Pat Bev, he and Melton have been kind of running the second unit when Maxey is off the floor, which I don't know is sustainable from a playoff perspective, but at least regular season, I think they can get by with it. I think that's probably the one question hanging over this team right now, beyond just the Harden stuff, is like, do they have enough playmaking once we get into late season playoff settings?
Right.
But for now, you've got 79 more games. You got a trade deadline to answer that question. And if or when James Harden comes back, that will also help solve that problem, because then you can have Maxey paired with the second unit, or Harden paired with the second unit, which is what they did last year. And I think that would actually help Paul Reed get going in particular, because he's had kind of a slow start to the year. But they are a lot less reliant on PJ Tucker, which I think is good given his age, because of a guy like Kelly Oubre that they just didn't have last year. They're giving Daniel House more run. Like, I think the coaching staff deserves credit for, they're trying to figure out which combinations of players work well together or don't work well together, or they're testing the limits of these players early on, which is exactly what you should be doing when you're in Philly's shoes. And based on personnel, as long as you don't have any catastrophic injuries, regardless of what happens with Harden, you're probably winning 45 plus games. You're probably, maybe you don't get a top 6 seed, maybe you fall into the play-in, but like realistically, you are a playoff team, and you should be, you should be experimenting during the regular season to figure out exactly what does and doesn't work. So when you get into the playoffs, then we have plan A, but we also have plan B, plan C, plan D. Because I think what hampered them last year, they knew this Harden and Embiid pick and roll was so dynamic, and it was their bread and butter, and it was really hard to defend.
Maybe the hardest thing to defend in the league last year, honestly.
Right.
Yeah.
Except the Boston Celtics had a pretty good answer for it after a while. It was just put Jaylen Brown on James Harden. And once it started to sputter, they didn't have that counterpunch. So now I think this year they do seem like they are harder to predict offensively, because it is not just James Harden commandeering the ball in the half court. Like now, because there is so much more ball and player movement, that's going to help. And then again, like with this amount of personnel that they can interchange, I think that's only going to help them as well.
Yeah. And by the way, that's when you'll see the real Nick Nurse moments shine. Like I think regular season wise, this team is good enough, like you said, to kind of be a top 6 team in the East, regardless, barring any major injuries. This team is kind of going to trek along to be a 45 plus win team. It's just, you have an MVP candidate. You have a guy who might be a most improved candidate. The talent on the roster is there for this team to succeed in the regular season. Playoff wise, though, like you said, that's when Nick Nurse becomes really special, because you can carve out an option B through Z or Z, depending on American or Canadian pronunciation. I actually don't know which one's which, but you have you have multiple options there. And I think that's important just because of the lineups you can throw out there. Last year, I wrote about the different backcourt lineups that they had between Maxey Melton. It was Maxey, Harden, and Melton all together. Then you had the Harden and Maxey duo. And all three of those were kind of positive, right? They got out positive results for them, but they rarely went to all three of them. It was very much so we're kind of stuck in our ways. We're keeping either one group together. If a guy is hurt, then we'll go to that. And having that rigidness in the regular season makes it so that you're even more rigid in the playoffs, and you're not able to be fluid, saying like, okay, hey, the matchup isn't working, whatever, they're doubling this guy. They're maybe forcing the ball out of his hands. How are we going to maximize the rest of this team? And you look at guys like Tobias Harris, who I think has started the season really well. I think he's been pretty awesome to start the year. DeAnthony Melton, a guy who can shoot the ball and stretch the floor for you. We mentioned Kelly Oubre earlier, but like having these plug and play guys that can play multiple positions, can maybe guard a few different positions as well, just makes this team that much more malleable to different changes, different schemes that they see in the playoffs. That's the beauty of Nick Nurse right there. You'll probably later down the road, you'll probably see the but yes, that is the beauty of Nick Nurse. Okay. I wanted to ask you in general about how you might see the defense changing, because, at the start of camp, it was, hey, we're going to empower Joel Embiid to be more effective on the defensive end, maybe focus more on being that shot blocking, shot deterring type of guy in the middle. At the top, I sort of mentioned how their backcourt looks a little bit better defensively because you have Melton, because you have guys like Oubre that can slot in there. What have you seen defensively from this group that either changes with Harden or maybe just is like a different look compared to how it was last year with James in the lineup?
Yeah, I mean, to your point, Embiid has been a lot more aggressive defensively, at least hunting block shots and rim protection in general. He had 6 blocks against the Blazers and, didn't even play the fourth quarter. So, it's been really fun and impressive to see him in that type of role. And it seems like guys know that he's been empowered to do that. So they aren't chasing, like if, someone blows by Maxey or Melton or Tobias, they know they have that backline of defense, and that backline of defense is a potential defensive player of the year candidate. So they're not reaching in and committing a ton of stupid fouls, which is something that plagued them last year in particular. Again, to your point with Harden out, Melton in the starting lineup, Nick Nurse was emphatic about how good he was defensively against the Blazers. He's gotten off to a slow start offensively, but Nurse was saying after the game, like, look, he can shoot poorly and still have a good game. And I think he's done that. His hands are everywhere.
Yeah.
I think there was he basically had a 5-0 run by himself where he hit a 3 and then caused a steal and got a fast break. And, he is one of the few guys on the team who is capable of doing that. So it's been nice to see him in that role. He did, start a ton of games last year because Harden got hurt, then Maxey got hurt, then Maxey came off the bench. Right. And to your point about the lineups from earlier in the interchangeability, former head coach Doc Rivers said there were 3 starting lineups that he was considering at some point in the season. And I don't think he ever did all 3. I think we only saw 2 versions of them. So, we'll see what happens possibly as soon as Thursday. We'll see how that changes. I don't want to bring James Harden back to this team is the bottom line.
Okay, so this is actually the thing I wanted to transition to. There is the question of, Harden was, I believe, on the bench, right? Yes. Against the Blazers. He was there. He was sitting down, watching the game. There is this idea that maybe he'll come back on Thursday. I don't know. All I'm saying is, regardless of how Harden, if he comes back, right, and how he might be incorporated into this team, I imagine it's not a long-term thing. I imagine they're still working to get him moved. So my question to you is, do they need to ask for, not a king's ransom? They're not asking for a king's ransom in the first place, but they don't need that quote-unquote package to get a superstar because of how good this team looks. Do you agree with that notion that they actually don't need that much in return for a Harden trade because this team already has most of the goods to be very, very good this season?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're not going to suddenly see how these first 3 games went and be like, oh, okay, we'll actually settle for this Clippers package of, 1 pick and no Terrence Mann because Terrence Mann is untouchable. I think their asking price is going to remain what it is. But
and to be honest, the asking price is fair. I do think it's a pretty fair asking price. Yeah.
Right. I mean, because you can look back and say, okay, well, James Harden's 34. He's on an expiring contract. He's going to want a new long-term deal. Yeah. When the Sixers traded for him 2 years ago or a year and a half ago, it was the same thing. He was on an expiring contract. They thought he was going to pick up his player option. He for quote unquote forgot to. Right. As part
forgot to mail it in, right?
Right, as part of the trade. So it was a potential 4-month rental, and they gave up 2 draft picks, Ben Simmons, Seth Curry, and Andre Drummond for him. Yeah. I don't think 2 picks or a pick and a swap in Terrence Mann, which I forget. I think it was Sam Amick or Jake Fisher. It's hard to remember who reports what these days. But if it's 1 pick, 1 swap, and Terrence Mann and expiring contracts for James Harden, I feel like that's reasonable, and I feel like the Clippers are the one. I can understand why they're reluctant to do so, but it's not the Sixers' problem, and I think come December 15th, there will be a lot more guys who are eligible to be traded, and I would imagine, that's kind of what I wrote about this morning at Forbes Sports. It was Like the start of the season, this first week of the season, really, it like could have gone better for the Sixers. They could have beaten the Bucks on opening night, and that would have been great. But like otherwise, could not have gone much better for their decision to be patient with him, because they, as you said, they look really good. They're 2-1, and there are other teams already, like the Chicago Bulls in particular, who appear to be in total disarray 3 games into the season. And I think
very shaky. Yes. Absolutely.
And I think that's kind of the thing that Daryl Morey is banking on, is that, everyone feels good in the offseason, or most teams feel good in the offseason. You're optimistic about, oh, this guy's going to tape Galip, or we signed this guy, we traded for this guy, it's going to go so well. And then the season starts, and theoretical turns into actual, and sometimes theoretical is a lot rosier than the actual. So, do we get to December 15th or January 15th where, the Bulls, who are like, oh, we're not going to rebuild, we're not going to blow it up, we're just going to retool. Well, what if they remained on this shaky ground for the next 2.5 months? Do they come to reconsider that decision? Because if so, DeMar DeRozan might be on the market. Maybe Zach LaVine is on the market. We'll see how this evolves over the next few weeks and months. But I don't think the Sixers should be in any rush to trade Harden. And I frankly think they should have him on a pretty short leash. Like, we've seen the Harden playbook, his way to force his way out of Houston and Brooklyn was play well for a while and then just stop caring and loaf around the court until the team was just like, okay, we are just exasperated. We don't want you around anymore. I think as soon as he starts showing signs of that, just put him on the bench. Like, you don't need him to do this. You don't have to tolerate any nonsense for him, because you've proven that you're totally fine without him. And I actually think, from Harden's perspective, if he wants to force the trade, like I don't know if he's going to be able to successfully force it to the Clippers unless they up their.
He should play better. He should play well. Yeah,
the
goal should be yeah.
Yeah, not only that, but like if he shows that he's willing to buy into Nick Nurse's system and is not just, I'm going to commandeer the ball and I'm going to dribble for 16 seconds and then launch a step back 3 without, maybe I pass it one time or maybe I don't. Like, if he's willing to move off the ball, I think one of the reasons the offense has been so good so far is the 2-man chemistry between Maxey and Embiid. When Maxey kicks it to Embiid, he's not done moving. He's running around screens still, and they have 2-man chemistry that even Embiid and Harden did not, because when Harden kicked Embiid the ball, it's like, all right, I'm going to give it to you, and you can either go post up or just, if it's on a short roll, then great, we're just going to run the pick and roll, and you're going to get it, and you're going to score right away. But if I kick it to you and you're posting up, I'm done moving. I'm just going to park on the perimeter. Maxey is still running around screens. Like, this is a souped-up version of what they used to have with the Embiid JJ Redick 2-man game, or the Embiid Seth Curry 2-man game, except Tyrese Maxey.
Handoffs, man. It's the handoffs. Like, the thing about Maxey is that he's so good at turning a corner that, he can be in a pick and roll and he can kind of get over his guy, but also he can throw it into the post for Embiid, or high post area, which Embiid loves. And then from there, dribble handoffs, right? Cut around him. And I think that is something that helps Maxey excel so much. And we've seen that without Harden. I wonder how much thrusting Harden into that will sort of mess things up. And look, Harden's still a talented player. We still know what he can bring. But ultimately, there is a world where this team looks really, really good without him for the next whatever amount of time that he's not playing. They bring him back. Maybe he buys in, maybe he doesn't, but maybe they look different and don't look as good as they did beforehand. And then there's trade discussions that happen once December 15th happens and there's more guys available. Once January 15th happens and there's more guys available. And then there's a trade and we look back and it's like, okay, there's Norm Powell and Terrence Mann on this team, added on to the fact that they already have this nucleus. Like, they haven't played with James Harden for the first 3 games, and they have an 8-9 man rotation. Throwing a guy like Norm Powell in there, who is one of the best bench scorers in the league. Throwing a guy like Terrence Mann in there, who's like a utility knife on defense. And then you have maybe an extra pick or 2. I think that really sets up the Sixers to do excellent in the playoffs. Not because of addition minus whatever whatever the saying is. I can't remember.
Addition by subtraction.
Thank you. Addition by subtraction. Yeah. Not because of that, but because of the sense that they look good without him. They have a different identity without him. And adding these different pieces, whatever they may be, maybe it's DeMar DeRozan, right? Who knows? That actually makes them better. And I wonder how you feel about that. Like, do you think that this team with the types of players that I just mentioned might actually look better than it does with James Harden instead of, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, again, it comes down to Harden's buy-in, I think. If he is willing to buy into what Nick Nurse is selling, which seems like a very, very long shot at this point, but on the off chance that he is actually willing to move off the ball on occasion, he did, to his credit, fired more catch and shoots than he did in years past last year. Like he said it was a huge adjustment for him because he's been on ball, for his entire Houston tenure. You would think he would have started to do that more in Brooklyn, but we'll forget about that for now. So he did adapt his game to some extent last year, but this is his opportunity to do so again. And I think the more that he can prove he is malleable is going to make it him more attractive to other teams. Because I think if other teams are trading for him thinking, okay, we get him, but we're going to have to play his specific style, which, was really effective.
And probably have to pay him,
Right.
I mean, right. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But, that style was very effective for a long time, but he's not quite the same player. I don't know that he can do it on a game-to-game basis like he could in his prime. We see these blow-up games, games 1 and 4 of the Boston series last year. Like he still has that potential to single-handedly win a game for you, but he also has the potential to shoot like 2 of 11 and have 8 turnovers and score 7 points and like be the reason why you lose. So you don't want your offense to be so Harden centric. And then, there's the Stephen A. Smith report from a couple weeks ago where he said, Houston was really in on Harden. And then Harden said, hey, I want to come back and I want to be the scoring champ. And then Houston was like, actually, we're going to go with Fred VanVleet. Thank you. So, I don't know if that's true or not, but if it is, that's the concern. Like, does Harden...
Telling. Well, if that is true, that's telling where his mind is at, right? It's not invested in trying to buy in, like you said, to change how he plays or how he's supposed to look on the court with a guy like Joel Embiid and a guy like Tyrese Maxey beside him. It's very Harden centric, right? He's focused on himself. He's focused on, getting the money that he wants to, whatever. Okay. I would love to see how the Sixers look in April, right? Because it's all fun and dandy right now. Maxey looks incredible. Joel Embiid looks great. But I think ultimately what I'm looking for is, hey, 28 weeks from now, 29 weeks from now, how does the team in general look under Nick Nurse? And it's going to be interesting to see. Bryan, anything you want to mention before we head out? Anything you got plugged? Obviously, you do a lot of great work over at Bleacher Report, over at Forbes Sports, et cetera, et cetera. What do you got going on that you want to mention?
Well, thanks again for having me. I did write this morning, again at Forbes, on why the Sixers have been patient so far with Harden and why I think they should continue to be patient with Harden. I'm working on something for Liberty Ballers that will come out later this week on, how I don't want him to ruin their early season vibes. So, kind of digging into one thing I haven't mentioned, their pace. They were, their offense, they had the third best offense in the league last year. So again, I don't want to make this sound completely negative about James Harden. He was a huge part of what they did.
Of course. Yeah.
They were running at the 4th slowest pace of any team last year. This year, again, only 3-game sample size. We'll see. Maybe things change, but they're running a little bit faster this year. So I think that's the thing that I want to see, how his eventual return, if it does happen, how that affects the team's offensive structure, how it affects Maxey in particular. Does Embiid's playmaking take a hit? Like, those are the red flags that would concern me, looking ahead to the playoffs. But again, I would be very, very surprised if James Harden is on this roster leading into the playoffs.
Yeah, actually, you kind of gave a point that is interesting. I mean, I do think without Harden, Joel is empowered to be more of a playmaker, and you give him 82 games of that, And in the playoffs, him handling double teams, him, working out of the high post, it's just going to look so much better because there's more chemistry there. He knows when guys are cutting. He knows the spots guys like it. I think that it's weird because, again, it's really early. It's a super early reaction, but maybe this team needed to take a step back in the regular season in order to look better in the playoffs. And sometimes that happens, right? We saw that with the Milwaukee Bucks a few years ago before they won the championship. In the regular season, it wasn't, hey, let's strive for 60 wins anymore. It was, let's work. Let's use this as an experimentation process through 82 games to see what works, what doesn't. And sometimes that benefits a team mightily in the playoffs. Maybe that happens to the Philadelphia 76ers. Who knows?
Let's hope. Honestly, I'm in the mindset of they're not going to win a title this year.
Yeah.
Regardless. So the individual development is the thing. It honestly feels like kind of a process season, like a rich man's process season, where I'm just focused on each player's individual development and the early signs individually from Maxey, Embiid, Tobias, Kelly Oubre, and Melton with this playmaking. All of these things are screaming positive. So I think those are wins and losses. It's going to be hard for me to get worked up about them this year. It's really
what are wins and losses? The NBA is emphasizing this in-season tournament to promote regular season, but forget about wins and losses, ladies and gentlemen. No, we'll see. Apparently the NBA is releasing some kind of new court design or something for the in-season tournament today. So we'll see how that looks and everything. Brian, appreciate you as always. Thank you very much for jumping on. And thank you to everybody else who has tapped into the Objective Basketball Podcast. As always, do the liking, subscribing, and rating and things that you guys do. And we appreciate you guys listening. Take care.
Follow hosts at Just S. Barahini on all socials and at The Lauren Gunn on Twitter. The Objective Basketball Podcast, delivering the NBA to you like no other.